안녕하세요. Hello everyone. Hello everyone watching. Oh, it's cool to be here. Yeah. You know, I always have people asking me about my family and my history and what it was like when I was a child. Because they see me now and they think, wow, you must have had some kind of unique childhood. And so I always like to share. And every class, every time with students, I say some things about my childhood. So I think it's important here on this channel to talk a little bit about me and who I am and where I came from. How did this human being get to become this human being? So I was born in Toledo, Ohio. My father was born in 1904 and my mother was born in 1916. So I grew up in Toledo and my father had a small business there. My father didn't graduate from high school and my mother didn't go to college. My mother stayed at home and she worked for a doctor from our home. And she did the billing, the bookwork for anesthesiologist. My father had a small company where he made hospital supplies. It was a factory. He used to sell hospital supplies, and then one day in his mind he said, wait, I could just get the machines and make things myself. So that's what he did. My father was an inventor. He actually has 3 different patents of things that he did. And so he's very much like me in that way. You know, very innovative, always looking for some new idea or something. And they bought a house together, and then that's the house I grew up in. And we had a very stable childhood. We didn't have a lot of money, but we had enough money. I had a nice childhood. Although my brother, who's 2 years older than me, his name is Joe, he used to beat me up all the time. So I probably deserved it because I was probably always saying things to him. But otherwise, it was really good until I was 9.5, and that's when my father died. And then that changed everything. Because then his was the main source of income. And so my mother had to work 3 jobs and she was never home. And, you know, nobody was looking at my grades at school and it just didn't, I was on my own, you know, so. First off, to have a parent die at a young age, it's very scary because, you know, my mother could have died and then I don't know what would have happened to me, you know. But at the same time, for me personally, it gave me a lot of freedom. And I was working a lot. I used to do work around the neighborhood. So at a very young age, I was working. I was cutting lawns. I was helping people in their homes. I was doing many, many different things as a little kid and making money because I needed money to buy things, you know. And that was pretty cool because I was very mature for my age. And then I would go work in the factory that my dad had. My mom kept the factory going. So after school, I would go down to the factory and I would work on the machines. You know, I had a key and I would go in and I would start up the machines and, you know, just really crazy for a little kid, you know. But I did, and it was really, I felt very mature and very wise and very strong and capable. And I felt proud. But I didn't do any schoolwork, ever. I never did schoolwork. I only read books. When I was young, I was not a very good student because my mom was working all the time and I didn't have anyone to tell me that I needed to study hard. And not only that, but I wasn't expected to go to college. Like nobody around me went to college. And so I had fun. You know, I was a musician. I played drums. I played rock and roll. I played in lots of bands from when I was really, really young. And I used to skip class and I would go down to the library and read books, you know, because that was really interesting to me. But school was really pretty boring. And it was boring because nobody seemed like they were asking questions. They were just telling me what I needed to think, you know, to score, to pass exams and that kind of stuff. When I was young, I was really good in sports. So I played football and basketball and baseball. I was really good in baseball. I actually was in the Little League World Series here in the United States when I was 11 years old and when I was 12 years old. I just was good athletically. I grew up with a lot of kids around me and we used to just play sports all the time. So every sport I played. Yeah. We have this idea that college professors were all really smart when they were young. Well, that might be true. Some were really smart, but in the world that I'm from, sociology, I find a lot of people who are like me. They didn't get good grades when they were young, and they were always thinking outside the box. They were always the fish that was swimming upstream. They were thinking differently than everybody else. And so they graduated high school and college with kind of low grades. But then at some point in time, their minds just, boom, opened up. And then they went to graduate school, and then they become professors, you know. And so people like me, then, what we do is we teach to people in our classes like us. They're not the best students. We often teach to the students who don't get the best grades but have the coolest ideas. And those are students that are really fun to reach. My father was very rigid in his thinking, so I needed to learn math and be a scientist, right? So now, if he were alive and I said, you know, I want to be a sociologist, he would have said, no, like, you can't do that. And then we would have been fighting with each other, you know? So the fact that he died, in a way, opened up a doorway for me to be really creative in the things that I'm doing. Yeah, and that's the good and the bad, you know. You know, one of the things that really opened my mind to the world, to sociology, is because my mom was never afraid of people who were different from her. In fact, she always wanted to travel. She always wanted to go to college, but she never could do either one of them. So we would go to restaurants, you know, like a Persian restaurant or Korean restaurant or Chinese or Mexican or somewhere. And she would always want to go where they're speaking their own language. And the reason is because she thought that that made it more authentic. And then that was her way of traveling. And so she wasn't able to travel there because it just wasn't part of her life, but she could do it at those restaurants. And she took me with her. And she would say, hey, we're going to go to this restaurant. And I'd say, okay. And she would teach me about the food. She would always get food that she would ask them, hey, what's the most authentic dish? Or what's the dish that nobody would ever eat like me? And she'd say, I want that dish. So, you know, I learned to not be afraid. And I watched her talk to people. And so that was the beginning of my sociological curiosity. I think what I did is I took my mother, instead of going to restaurants in Toledo, Ohio, I went to restaurants all over the world. So I took what she taught me and I just went out in the world and experienced things that she always wished she could experience. I had the idea that my parents loved me. I was able to walk through the world with the idea that people would like me. If they met me, they would like me. And I think that allowed me to become a teacher in the best of ways. Because when I walk into the classroom, or when I turn a camera on, even recording this video, I do it with the idea that, you know, if people sat down with me and had a coffee or a beer with me or just talked, they would like me. And I would like them because I like everybody. I think my childhood taught me that life is really about balance. I remember on the day that we buried my father on his funeral. And I came home because I had to go to baseball practice. I was 9 years old and I was playing baseball. And I got home and I remember sitting on my bed and thinking, oh God, what am I gonna do? Like I don't have a father. And I went in my mother and father's bedroom and I looked at my father's things, his clothes, his watch, things that were there, you know, and I felt so sad. And then I got my baseball glove and I said, okay, well now I'm going to baseball. And I felt excitement that I was going to go play baseball, you know, and I will never forget the balance of these two things, the deep sadness and the excitement of playing baseball. And I think all my life I've seen these two things come together constantly, you know. So I think I mentioned, you know, the fact that my father died closed many doors, but it opened many doors. I would not be a sociologist today had my father lived for another 10 years. I would have gone down a very different path. So this is how life is. You know, we don't know what's going to happen next. We don't know what's good for us. We don't know what's bad for us. And the sooner that we understand that, the sooner we see it, the much easier life will be, the much less stressful it will be. That is my lesson to the world right there. And if you're young or middle-aged or old, like me, learn that lesson, because that's the best lesson of life. And when you get that, it makes being on one's deathbed much easier and much more fun. Katok. I love using Korean emoticons. It's very difficult to translate emoticons. There's no way to put them through a translator. So I was sending one to this person who is a CEO of a big company in Korea. I sent an emoticon that said, and I didn't know that that's what it said. I thought it said something else.